It's time now for the news review of this bulletin. The United States sending a message to North Korea that it's ready to act forcefully if Pyongyang conducts a nuclear test. Here's Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman warning of a strong response.
Any nuclear test would be in complete violation of UN Security Council resolutions. There would be a swift and forceful response to such a test, and I believe that not only the ROK in the United States and Japan, but the entire world will respond in a strong and clear manner. We are prepared.
Sherman, who is currently visiting Seoul, says Pyongyang's possible nuke test will be at the heart of the conversation during a meeting with her South Korean and Japanese counterparts tomorrow. In the meantime, Seoul and Washington have put on a new show of force against the North by flying 20 warplanes in formation. Earlier, they engaged in a tit-for-tat launch of 8 missiles in response to one of the largest missile tests ever by Pyongyang. There's also speculation that the North is preparing for a nuclear test in the days ahead. If conducted, that would be its first in 5 years. Frank Smith is our correspondent joining us from Seoul. Marcus Papadopoulos is an author and historian joining us from London. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. Frank Smith, I guess the big question right now is whether North Korea is going to go ahead with this nuclear test. What information do you have on that front?
Well, there's various different intelligence that indicates North Korea has made all the preparations for a test. South Korean lawmakers were briefed by the National Intelligence Service here about 2 weeks ago. They were told that North Korea could conduct a missile test at any time, which it did, and that it was also prepared to conduct a nuclear test at its Punggye-ri missile site in Kilju, North Hamgyong province, inside of North Korea, in the side of a mountain. There's other intelligence from a media outlet here in the South Korean capital called Daily NK, of North Korean defectors with sources inside North Korea that say that they have prepared that nuclear test site, tunneled into the site, laid cables, placed detonation devices, and also placed a command center for the test. There's also a time element here because once the detonators have been placed, there is a subsequent potential degrading that could take place because of moisture. So North Korea, this intelligence suggests that it's likely to conduct the test sooner rather than later.
Marcus Papadopoulos, it appears that this is a question of who's going to blink first. How do you assess the situation when it comes to the way that North Korea has conducted itself, i.e. the missile test, and of course the way that the U.S. and its allies in that region have reacted to it?
North Korea's recent ballistic missile tests must be seen against the backdrop of a very substantial ongoing increase in America's military presence in both the Far East and Southeast Asia, coupled with the actuality that America is modernizing and expanding its own nuclear arsenal. So, when all of that is taken into consideration, together with how America and North Korea are historic adversaries, plus the aggressive rhetoric which is emanating from the Biden administration against North Korea, it is only understandable that the North Korean government feels both threatened and isolated and encircled. Specifically, when it comes to North Korea feeling encircled, we have to take into consideration how America is augmenting its already heavy military presence in Japan, in Guam, and in South Korea. Therefore, once again, how do we expect the North Korean government to respond to those developments? It is inevitable that the North Koreans will look to expand their own nuclear arsenal as the absolute guarantee of preventing an American-led attack against North Korea. I do not wish to see North Korea have nuclear weapons. I do not wish to see Russia, America, Israel, Britain, France, India, and Pakistan have nuclear weapons. The problem is this: when one country develops nuclear weapons, it is inevitable that what will ensue is other countries developing nuclear weapons. And we all know the first country to have developed nuclear weapons, namely the United States of America.
All right, let's take a listen to some of the online posts on this matter, and we'll get right back to our discussion. Our first post: the world is very strange. The U.S. is allowed to test and possess nuclear weapons, while North Korea is not allowed to do so. If the U.S. possesses nuclear weapons, it's safe, but Iraq and North Korea possessing such weapons is a security risk. Who makes such decisions? Next post: if the U.S. gives up threatening North Korea, we could have peace. If North Korea gives up its nuclear program, it could end up like Iraq or Libya. Next, trust is mutual. South Korea does not trust North Korea, and North Korea does not trust South Korea. If North Korea does not have nuclear weapons, the United States and South Korea will overthrow the North Korean regime within 72 hours. And finally, America was defeated in the Korean War and defeated in the Vietnam and Afghanistan wars. America fears North Korea, China's spoiled child. So how will a nuclear country confront China, which can mobilize 80 million Chinese soldiers within 48 hours? America digs its own grave. Some of the online posts there. Frank Smith, I don't know if you can tell us, but isn't there some kind of clause that actually exists in terms of a pact between U.S. and its allies in that part of the world, like South Korea and Japan? But in particular South Korea, where South Korea cannot actually dictate the route it's going to go regarding the North, militarily speaking, that the U.S. can actually order the South Korean military, if in case it wants to attack the North, that then it has to oblige. Is that accurate?
Yes, there is a so-called status of forces agreement and a command and control agreement between the South Korean military and the U.S. military. We've got to remember there are 28,500 U.S. troops here. They have multiple bases all over the country. So they have what's called command and control should a war break out on the Korean Peninsula and dictate how the South Korean military will behave in a conflict with North Korea.
Marcus Papadopoulos, finally, when it comes to Russia and China, who are obviously allies of North Korea, the U.S. cannot look for help from them. Of course, Russia, definitely not. China, distinct possibility. What are we looking at when it comes to the way that North Korea actually gets or has some kind of obligations when it comes to China? In other words, does China have some kind of influence over North Korea when it comes to this whole posturing that North Korea has?
Beijing most certainly does have leverage over the North Korean decision-making process, though we should also be mindful that in recent years, China has somewhat stepped away from its strategic partnership with North Korea. And as a result of that, that has allowed the Russian Federation to expand its own strategic partnership with North Korea. Following the establishment of North Korea, the Soviet Union was the principal friend and ally to North Korea, and then after that, China became the principal friend and ally to North Korea. But as I said, the Russians are looking to expand their own influence in North Korea. And I believe that when it comes to the American menace to North Korea, and we have to be very clear that the Americans do pose a threat to North Korea, though when Donald Trump was in the White House, we do have to commend him for having spoken directly with the North Korean leadership. And as a result of Donald Trump's policy, tension between North Korea and America was diffused somewhat. But in regard to the present, the Biden administration is behaving very threateningly towards North Korea. Therefore, Russia and China will also act as immense guarantors for North Korea's security, for North Korea's independence and sovereignty, even though, as I mentioned, China has stepped away slightly from its relationship in North Korea. Nonetheless, when it comes to the American threat to North Korea, in no way will the Chinese permit America to expand even further its political, economic, and military presence on the Korean Peninsula, because, after all, the Korean Peninsula is very, very close, is a neighbor to China, and of course the Korean Peninsula is a neighbor to the Russian Federation. So Moscow and Beijing undoubtedly would harmonize their actions if America was to consider some sort of military action against North Korea, which I doubt it would. Why? Because North Korea has nuclear weapons. But nonetheless, the Americans have demonstrated for decades now that they are capable of the seemingly unthinkable.
Thank you for that. Marcus Papadopoulos, author and historian from London. Frank Smith, thank you so much. Correspondent there from Seoul. With that, we come to an end for this news review.